butter, make sure it's not going to boil, and I'm not going to lose any moisture. Normally, you make pate choux, you pipe, eclairs, profiteroles, whatever it is you want. You don't use molds. But what I have found is that this is a very convenient and consistent way to make pate choux. So it does take, I guess, it's kind of a preference thing. So if I'm making like 800 pate choux, which is something I used to do all the time, I used to have to make profiteroles for the garnish department, so they could put like seafood salad in it or something.
Wow.
And so I would just make a 60-quart bowl of pate choux and pipe until I was piped out. And I would just pipe it because it's just fast, right? I didn't have a depositor or anything fancy like that in my kitchen, so I piped it by hand. But at the same time, we can do this, it's more consistent. You know you're going to have the correct size every single time and the correct shape when you unmold it to bake it. But can you imagine piping 800 of these, having to smooth each one, freeze it, pop it out, place it, it's just a lot of work. So when you're doing large quantities of pate choux, I think you're going to go the more traditional route of just piping it and making it and just, using your hand skills, using your chef skills to pipe consistently as best you can. But if you're doing something sort of more high-end, more upscale, sort of Instagram-worthy, if you will, this is a great method as well, especially for smaller quantities. Maybe you're doing plated desserts in a fine dining restaurant, you have a sheet component, or maybe you're just doing small buffets, weddings, or brunches, things like that. And the other great thing about this is that it's sort of, I don't want to call it idiot-proof, but kind of is. I mean, if you think about it in terms of piping, not everyone has the skills to be able to pipe consistently all the time. I'm not saying you guys don't, I'm sure you do, but we're going to try this way. So I'm going to use these to mold the sheet. So my butter is almost melted. Probably was an idea to do that before you came over. Sorry, we have some time today. So my flour mixture here, remind me, what type of flour we're using today? Pate bread, so it's a mixture. I love to do my own all-purpose flour when I'm making pate choux, as opposed to using the bread flour that they call all-purpose flour here. I know that the protein content of the bread flour that they call all-purpose flour here is very similar to King Arthur all-purpose flour, normally like the one you buy in the grocery store. It's very similar, but I do like to make my own mix. Protein content is kind of a big deal for pate choux. So if you made it with all bread flour, it would have a different consistency and texture. It would have a different rise. And if you make it, sometimes I've made it with pastry flour, sometimes I've made it with like different variations of cake and all-purpose. I find that for eclairs, I really like a little less strength in my flour. For choux or profiteroles, I'm not as picky because they tend to rise the way they want to rise, and they're nice no matter what. Plus, with these, we put crackling on top. Crackling lets your pate choux expand more evenly and a little larger in the oven. So now that the butter's melted, I'm just going to crank this up so I can get a boil out of it. Just a second. I don't want it to boil forever, but just long enough to get nice and hot. So there is sort of a difference, sort of perspective for flours depending on which one you're making. And I feel like with pate choux, it's a very tricky little thing, kind of like French macks. Everyone's got their own little techniques that make it work for them. But these are mine. All right, so this is just about boiling. So I prefer to use a spatula the whole time. I know some chefs would like to use a whisk to kind of get the flour in, but I'm more comfortable with this, and I hate that I end up with all this stuff in the middle of the whisk, and it just like I have to, so I just go with this. And as long as you're careful about how you add it and how you mix it really quick, you shouldn't have any lumps. So all flour goes in, and then I'm taking it off the heat to do this just because it makes it a little bit simpler to mix in. It's going to look pretty gross at first. You guys can get in here if you need to. You've probably seen it before. Looks pretty nasty at first. Got a little stuff at the bottom there. And then, yeah, a little bit. Little mashed potatoes, makes sense. I forgot how high these burners are. Yeah, my tippy toes. So before I put it back on the heat, I smush it around make sure all of my flour is incorporated well and I don't have any large chunks. And then I put it back on the heat, maybe, there we go, about 20, 25 even, and then I'll just kind of adjust the heat as necessary. And I'm looking to cook this roux until it's a little bit shiny and that there's a little bit of what they call like fond. You've heard that expression before. Sort of a little bit of thin sort of residue on the bottom of the pot. You can almost hear it sizzling too. You want to move it around. This pot's a little weird. You can hear it sizzling. You can hear it now. So I'm just going to go a little longer. Some chefs will say you have to cook this for 5 minutes. Some chefs say 30 seconds. I'm kind of like, until it's done. And that's going to vary depending on batch size, right? I mean, the more you have in the pot, the longer it's going to cook. It's like pastry cream. Pastry cream, you cook it a minute when you have a small batch, but you cook it for like 5 when you have a big batch. So it just depends. So you can kind of see that I've got a little residue kind of starting on the bottom right there. And then also, if you kind of look at this in the light, it's starting to get a little shine to it. It's not going to be like super duper shiny like a bonbon or anything, but. Alrighty. Some chefs will even cook this to a certain temperature. I don't think I've ever done that before. I don't know why. So it's got a little sheen to it. Call it done. And as soon as it comes off the heat, you should be able to kind of gather it right up and go right into the bowl with it. This batch size is probably the smallest size you can successfully make in these mixers with the equipment that we have. So whenever you're making pate choux in this class, this is about the smallest you'll need, even if it's more than you need. So onto the mixer, paddle, you know the drill. Give it a couple seconds or so to release some steam. The eggs have been emulsified. We may or may not use all of them, as sort of pate choux is likely to be a variable, but the fact that they're emulsified means that we know we're getting an even distribution of yolks and whites, and we don't have to worry about any of that. So I'm going to go ahead and go in, and you add them slowly, but you don't want to take all day either. So you watch it, make sure it's well combined, and then go ahead. It's going to look pretty ugly at first. It looks all right. So because, again, this is a very tiny batch, you're probably going to have to get in there and scrape, whereas if you're using a larger amount, it's not as necessary. But I'm going to scrape it now, just kind of get it off the sides a little bit. Kind of looks icky. Look okay, Chef? I'm just kidding. So now look at this and look at how kind of, it looks a little separated. I mean, it's definitely more homogeneous than before, but it's still got like kind of a funky texture to it. So I'm gonna pull it off the mixer because it's such a small batch. I'm gonna pull it off the mixer and give it a good like paddle by hand, just because it'll be a little easier. I mean, I guess I can turn it up too, but.
You make it more liquid because you freeze it?
You know what? I've never really made the difference. I usually just go with the consistency that I think is correct, regardless of if I'm going to pipe it or mold it. Because in the end, it's not really, it's piping it, or, you know, you need that consistency for the shape that it's making, not so much for just the ease of piping, you know what I'm saying? So, all right, put there for a sec. So this last little addition of eggs, if I do it, I might just do it by hand, just to kind of get it more mixed up. So you guys know the different tests you could do with pate choux batter. So you can do the V test, where you kind of let it fall, and if it creates a V, it's good. You can do the track test, where you should make a track in it, and it should just maybe slowly kind of come back, but it should stay for the most part. Or this one, this is a favorite. Like you have to make a string. I don't really like that. It's kind of gross. But
I got it.
oh yeah, I like the V. I don't get my hands dirty. I don't have to worry about it. I like the V. The V test.
From Brave British Bake Off. I
I didn't
Oh.
learn that here. I'm not gonna lie. I learned that very
I don't think I've
recently
seen that,
watching
yeah.
that show.
So what do you guys think? Am I good?
That
I'm
is a
thinking I'm
V.
good. So I'm gonna leave these off, and I'm gonna wipe off my hands. Gosh, I'm so sticky. And just gonna load up the pastry bag, and of course, they are making, the team that I'm demoing for, Team 4, is making the Bella Choux. So it's a Choux Me, You Love Me Bella. So it's raspberry and vanilla and yogurt, and they
Wow.
don't need all of this, but we're just gonna pipe it all and bake it all anyway because, like I said, it's the smallest batch you can make. So quality control.
Yeah,
And then I
precisely.
also want
Thank you,
everyone making
business.
shoes, so there's no point, like especially on day one, everyone's making shoe, or not everyone, but at least all the teams that need to.
Mm.
We can start sharing. This is I'm sorry, day two. It's just because it's the first day of production, I'm all messed up. No, it doesn't. It's day two. Because I want your assignment schedule to go on time, and I really didn't want to push your buffet back any further than it was already, and I didn't want you to lose a prep day on buffet, so. Oh, yeah, scissors would be helpful. That was the one thing I was missing. So, fill up your pastry bag. Thank you so much. Just cut a little hole here, whatever, and then, just like you would normally fill any mold, just kind of.
So the lip doesn't bother you.
I'm not done yet.
The lip on the bag, I mean.
Oh, like this little thing?
Yeah.
Oh, not for something like this. Bonbons, I concur. You should get rid of that. You're making bonbons. So then you'll just want to go back and forth and make them full. I use underfill because I don't want to make a big, huge mess of it. So, you have to go around though, but each one has to look perfect like that. And then they just go into the freezer. And since we're not baking these today, they do not need to go into the blast. But at the same time, something like this can be unmolded today and just put on sheet pans. That way the molds are free for somebody else who might need them. So it might be ideal to just mold it all, pop them all, and then wash the molds and put the molds away. Yes?
Yes.
Had a shoe. Thank you.
Should be later.